All right, Mr. Chair, you are live.
Thanks. Welcome to the Thursday, August 3rd, Annapolis Planning Commission meeting. I'll call the meeting to order. And the first order of business is the roll call.
Mr. Plank,
Present.
Ms. Pico,
Present.
Mr. Spakinutis,
Present.
Mr. Imes,
Here.
Mr. Sale. I don't see him, sir, and I know we're not expecting Ms. Butler or Mr. Waldman. So we have
Great.
four.
Well, we have, four is a quorum for us, so we can proceed on the next items. So let me share my screen here. So first order of business is to approve the agenda, and so have it displayed here. And it's a fairly light agenda. The only thing that requires a vote is the approval of minutes. Can I?
I'll make a motion to approve the
this
agenda.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Great. Okay, so next order of business is approval of minutes from our last meeting on July 20th. I trust everybody's had a chance to look those over. If anybody would like me to display them, I can. But pretty straightforward from the last meeting. So if nobody, if somebody, I'd entertain a motion to approve those as Kimberly sent around. Well, I'll make the motion to approve as distributed. We get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and any discussion on them, or everybody satisfied? Hearing none, all in favor of approval of the July 20th meetings, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thanks, Kimberly. You can go ahead and publish those. Appreciate it. Okay, next order of business is our public hearings. And once again, we still have left open the public hearing on the Annapolis Ahead 2040 Comprehensive Plan. So we're in that 90-day public review period. I've been informed we have no new comments that were submitted to us directly to the Planning Commission, but we'll leave this open till our next meeting. And I think in the next in August, as we talked about prior to coming on air, we'll be discussing that in a little bit more detail. So that public hearing will stay open. So next order of business, unfinished business, that we don't have any unfinished business, which brings us to really the meat of tonight's meeting, new business, and it's a presentation on the Annapolis Bicycle Facility Standards Draft. And as a person who rides a bike around town a lot, I'm really interested to see the presentation. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Lashinsky for that presentation. And I think he's got a few other people online to talk more about that. So take it away, Eric.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to be with you, Eric Lashinsky, Chief of Comprehensive Planning. So I'm here with a few folks from the team that's been working on this. Kelly Peterson from Toole Design is on, and maybe folks can turn, yeah, there you go. Your camera is on. Brian Callahan from the mayor's office is here. And folks from Public Works have also been very involved. Couldn't be here tonight, but we've been making sure that the Department of Public Works is fully engaged in this project because it relates to our streetscapes and how to how to best accommodate bike facilities. By that, I mean the space for bicycles on our roadways and sidewalks, whether it's a striped bike facility or a shared lane marking, an off-street shared use path. Kelly will get into some of this in her presentation, but the reason why we're doing this project now is that we are in a phase of our city where we're trying to accommodate all road users as much as possible. And you know, there's a disturbing trend both in the city and nationally related to safety, where we're seeing an uptick in the number of crashes involving pedestrians and cyclists. At the same time, folks are very much concerned about traffic congestion and vehicles on the road. And, you know, as a city, we're pretty one-dimensional right now in terms of how you can get around. Having an automobile is really the key to being successful in the city currently. But we want to change that. We want to have a city where you don't need to have an automobile to get where you need to go, whether it's a job or school or conveniences, that you feel safe getting places on a bike if you want to. And we're very constrained in the city, obviously. You know, we seem to never have enough space for everything on our roadways, but there's been a lot that has changed since when we did our first bike master plan back in 2011. It's been over 10 years. We figured it would be helpful to have an update in terms of what we should be thinking about when we want to improve the space for our cyclists, where that should happen, the kind of standards that other cities are using today. There's a lot of guidance out there already. And so we asked Toole Design, who had done our bike master plan 2011, to help us with that. And we were able to get a grant for the project from the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. They have a small grants program, and that was critical to getting this project off the ground. So we've been working on this for several months now, and there's a related piece of the project, which is a feasibility study for improving the bike facilities along Chesapeake Avenue, Bay Ridge Avenue, and 6th Street between the Spot Creek Bridge and Quiet Waters Park. And so we're trying to apply some of what Kelly's going to talk about immediately to that corridor, which is heavily used by cyclists, but not very safe. So with that, I'll hand it over to Kelly. And I think you were going to share your screen, right, Kelly? Or do you want me to do it? Either way.
Yeah, I'm happy to get that situated. Thanks, Eric, for the introduction, and thanks to the chair and the commission for having us on your agenda this evening. Let's see. Okay, is that showing up for you?
Yep.
All right, you have the deck up? Just quick confirmation.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, we see it.
Terrific, thank you so much. So thank you. We wanted to just share with you kind of where we are with this draft memo for the bicycle facility design guidance. It's really intended to be a technical design guidance, as Eric was saying, for how the city goes about broadening and diversifying the spectrum of bike facilities throughout the city going forward. And the presentation I have is about 25 minutes or so. And given that we have a small group tonight, I would love for this to really be a dialogue. So please feel free to stop with questions or comments as I go through the presentation. This is just to provide the commission with an overview of our work to date. And we've gotten some really good feedback from city staff this past week, which we are incorporating and adding additional content to the memo. So just a quick background on Toole Design. So our firm is a team of planners, engineers, and landscape architects focused on designing and building spaces where people can move freely and be a part of their community, not just move through it. And part of the work that we did with this memo was really bring together a lot of national work, some of which we've worked intimately on and some of which we apply on a daily basis in our work. The list of projects here are AASHTO projects and FHWA design guidelines that we've worked on nationally. And this document is really a reflection of a lot of different design guidelines, which we will share with you. And then our work regionally.
So can I ask just a quick question on that?
Sure.
Yeah, is there a reason you don't reference any of the NACTO stuff?
We have referenced it in the memo. We haven't worked directly on that, as far as I know.
Okay, so you have worked. So these are things you've worked on directly.
The Toole
versus,
design is worked on. Yeah. So these aren't. Yeah. I'll get to the
Okay.
list of resources and
Oh, okay.
references that we pulled from. But this is just an example of the national level of work that Toole Design is doing with pedestrian and bike planning. And then our work regionally, we've done a lot of regional work. These are just a couple of example projects. Most recently, we've worked with the county on Walk and Roll Anne Arundel, which recommended 23 miles of separated bike lanes, 100 miles of new bike lanes throughout the county, and 200 miles of shared use paths. So that project just wrapped up earlier this year. And it also, as you probably know, made significant recommendations for Region 7, which includes Annapolis and some specific priority bike projects to help improve connectivity. And I won't get too far into this because I think Eric did a nice job of covering it. Just the planning context and the purpose for doing this is really to have give Annapolis design guidelines that reflect an evolving industry and best practices, and trying to find more context-sensitive designs. Bicycle facility planning and network planning has shifted and evolved a lot over the last decade. And so we're hoping to make sure that we're always aligning our bike facilities with the appropriate user groups. And one of our goals for this document is to help all of you set the stage for implementation and advance those projects so that you can enhance your bike network throughout the city, whatever that may look like. So setting the stage for strategic investments that add value, setting the city up for funding opportunities such as the MDOT Bikeways funding and a variety of other funding mechanisms to help inform when improvements will be implemented and how they will be implemented through what programs. And there's a huge desire in any community to create more predictable outcomes. So streamlining decision-making between city departments and community stakeholders. So I'll jump into a quick overview of the memorandum, which just the title page is there on the right. So one thing I just wanted to acknowledge up front is that each bike facility project is really context specific. So we're providing a series of design guidance. There's a lot of local knowledge that you all have, that city staff has, from planners to engineers, and there's a lot of important information the community has about their neighborhoods and corridors. And so all of those things work together to help identify the appropriate bike facilities and design solutions. And from this memo, it's not a one-size-fits-all kit of parts, right? So not all design guidance will be applicable to every project. So the memo has 5 key sections that I'll walk you through now, which are listed here. And I'll get into each one in a little bit of detail. And then getting back to your question, here are some of the references that we used. In our work, these are the most current, up-to-date industry best practices. As you'll see, they're mostly plus or minus in the last 5 to 7 years. And there are some that, including the Maryland MUTCD, that are only updated at larger intervals, but have important information about wayfinding and signage. So that's kind of the list that we pulled from, ranging from the NACTO bike guidelines to the FHWA bikeway selection guide. And we relied also on other states, including Massachusetts and Ohio, which have fairly recent industry best practices. So there's a couple planning considerations that we want to think about as we're designing bikeways. First are our design principles. The top three are often the most prioritized and the key principles, which are safety, comfort, and connectivity, which don't require a huge amount of explanation, but do require a lot of thoughtfulness and design to accomplish. The supporting design principles are directness, so minimizing distances and trip times, cohesion, which is how the network works as a whole, attractiveness in terms of making sure bike routes are attractive to cyclists, they pass by interesting things and provide safety, and then unbroken flow, which is really reducing wait times, making sure crossings are safe, and making sure there's a good flow for the cyclist on their journey. Another planning consideration is the level of traffic stress. So this is more of a technical analysis. I wanted to mention that MDOT has undertaken an effort to map all the roadways in the state for LTS. And so this is an analysis that takes into play prevailing roadway speeds, the number of daily trips, the number of travel lanes for vehicles, the presence of bike facilities, and the location of the bike facility in the roadway. So the rating score is from LTS 1, which is the lowest stress condition, to LTS 4, which is the most stressful condition. So as you look at this example chart on the right, you see that where we have lower traffic volumes, lower speeds in green, those are much more comfortable LTS 1 evaluations for cyclists, whereas we get higher speeds, higher volumes, higher numbers of lanes, we move into an LTS 4. And I'll add to that too, that the LTS from Walk and Roll identified that most of the neighborhood and connecting roadways in Annapolis ranked as an LTS 1 or 2, and most of the access roads in and out of Annapolis ranked as LTS 3 or 4, just for some reference there.
Yep, you know them all well.
Right. Another planning consideration is we have like the types of users. So you all might identify into one of these groups. These are kind of generic groups for how people self-identify as cyclists, and they express the range of users' abilities, enthusiasm, confidence, experience. So we've got, 37% of people who don't ride a bike have no plans to start. Approximately 51% of people who are interested but concerned, which means that they're more likely to feel safe on separated paths and on facilities that have fewer crossings with vehicular traffic. Enthusiastic and confident are folks that might prefer a separated path but are comfortable riding on the roads, assuming there's not a huge amount of traffic. And 7% are road warriors, are strong and fearless, confident riders who are comfortable riding in most situations.
So I have a fifth to add to this, and I brought this up a lot, and I don't know how you would ever quantify it, but it's something that we see here in Annapolis a lot, and I think in many urban places you see it, and I'm probably going to sort of flub what I call it. I'm sure there's somebody could come up with a much better term, but it's basically people with no choice, don't really sort of fit into any of these groups. So these four groups sort of assume that cycling is a choice, but we do have a lot of residents whose only method of getting around is on a bike. And typically you see a person on an old mountain bike riding the wrong way or on the sidewalk, that kind of thing. So I don't have a number to put on it, but I wish in this discussion there would be some way to capture that segment of sort of non-choice riders. Maybe it's the way to put that in sort of in transit terms.
I was going to say we have transit language for that, but that's a really good point for cyclists.
But in this discussion of types of users, you generally don't ever see that segment, and I think it's a fairly large segment around here. So just some feedback. I don't know how you'd include that, but it's worth noting.
Absolutely.
Brian,
is there another question or comment?
I was just going to say what Alex said, I think is increasing more year to year too. More and more people in their 30s don't even own a car, don't want to. They Uber when they need to, but would much prefer taking a bike.
Yeah, absolutely.
And especially through our Bike AAA Wheels of Hope program, you know, we provide. I'm a board member of Bike AAA, the local advocacy group, but we provide bicycles to people, you know, especially coming out of recovery programs, or you know, people who are coming out of being unhoused, et cetera. And so, I mean, we distribute a lot of bikes in the area, not just Annapolis, but throughout the county. You know, so there's a lot of people out riding bikes for as their sole method of transportation.
Yeah,
Now,
and we could
I want
take a look at the demographics that might help share some data that reveals a little bit more specificity to this type of general analysis.
Right. I just want to echo what Alex is saying, because I do believe a lot of these presentations, or at least the emphasis on bike routes and so on, tend to really lean on the leisure aspect of it, or the choice, rather than a primary mode of transportation, a necessity.
Yeah. Terrific. Yeah, I'll look into that data to see what we can find, and some custom data, maybe specific to Annapolis.
If you can get some demographics for age would be nice too, because as we know, you know, those that aren't of driving age just yet, high schoolers, middle schoolers, or whatever, this might be their primary mode of transportation as well.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, especially given the fiasco of our school bus service over the last year. Really
yeah,
bad.
and your comment is spot on. A lot of younger people are not getting their driver's licenses as early and are relying on other types of transportation, or things like micromobility that also play into the types of facilities that we build. You know, scooters and hoverboards and all kinds of micromobility that whose folks are using bike facilities generally.
Yep.
Thank you all for that feedback. That's very helpful. And then the final planning consideration that we looked at were really destinations and local considerations. So with Eric's help, we put together kind of a spectrum of corridors in Annapolis here, just representing the different street typologies that we could think about. This is obviously not all of them, but just a sample of them as we think about designing bike facilities and the different kinds of constraints, whether it's narrow right-of-ways, you know, whether it's, you know, corridors where we've got utilities right outside the right of way, or right alongside, we don't have a lot of wiggle room, or areas where we don't have curbs and, you know, and don't have a lot of space, and we might need to modify some of the design recommendations to accommodate that. And generally, Annapolis has an advantage in that, you know, it's primarily flat. The geography is fairly easy to navigate. But there are sort of these horizontal constraints with the right-of-way that a lot of other cities experience, you know, especially with roads that have been built a long time ago. There's just not a lot of room to fit everything that we want in there. And then in terms of destinations, considering those as we design facilities. So in the 2011 bike plan, some of the key destinations were outlined. Those included the Annapolis Mall, the Annapolis Arts District, City Dock, South Shore Trail, and Pearl Town Center. So, so that's kind of the planning context as we think about bike facilities. And then to kind of advance our conversation about the users, how do we align our facilities and our users? How do we define the facilities, and then how do we align them with our users? So the 5 types of bike facilities that we focused on in this technical memo are shown here. There are, starting on your left, we have a standard bike lane, and this is here in Annapolis on Melvin Avenue, kind of our typical bike lane with the nice traffic calming that's been implemented on that corridor that is shown here. The second photo is of a buffered bike lane. So this is actually a photograph from Ann Arbor, a case study, where we have what we call sort of a horizontal buffer, meaning it's painted. And then we have kind of these vertical elements at the crosswalk there. But as you can see, this is also a bit of a constrained corridor. There's no parking on it, and the bike lane there to me looks like it's about 4 feet, which is sort of the lowest width you want a bike lane to be, with about a 6-inch buffer there. So even on constrained corridors, it's possible to make a buffered bike lane work.
So an example of where that will show up soon, we hope, is on Skipper's Lane through Providence Point. There'll be a 10-foot travel lane, 2-foot buffer, and then I think a 5-foot bike lane. Pretty generous. Maybe the only one that would exist in the city at that point.
That's a great point, Alex.
In the third photo, we've got a separated bike lane. So again, back to Annapolis at Jennifer Road and Admiral Drive. There we've got both horizontal and vertical buffers, including the flexi posts that are providing a little bit more of a visual and physical separation of the bike lane.
And by the way, that's the only cycle track in the county.
Is it? Okay.
You may know that from Walk and Roll Anne Arundel.
Yeah.
It's the only separated two-way cycle track in the county.
That's great. And then we've got our shared use path in Annapolis at Forest Drive and the intersection of Cherry Grove Avenue, where we've got our path that's a separated grade from the street, wider than a standard sidewalk or a bicycle lane, and opportunity for both pedestrian, bicyclists, and micromobility users, as we'll call them, expressing the variety of different types of micromobility opportunities out there. And then the newly sharrowed bicycle boulevard as the final image on the right, which is on Franklin Street. And it sounds like those sharrows were just added quite recently. But this is providing the bicycle boulevard, providing more of a neighborhood facility. And we'll get a little more into detail about each of these in the next section. But those are just some local references expressing the types of facilities we are looking at and providing design guidance on in the memo. And then, so this next slide really expresses a couple of different pieces about how we want to think about aligning our bike facilities and our users, which is a critical element of the success of any facility. It gets back to our kind of key design principles of safety, comfort, and connectivity. So on the top of the diagram, we have kind of the spectrum of users on the left, starting with a child on the back of linked on the back of their adult's bike. And the scale of color there is starting from left to right, with green as the most separated type of facility, moving to the right to the least separated facility. So you can see the band of colors showing the most vulnerable users and those that we want to protect the most. And then underneath that, reflecting the types of facilities that are best suited. So a shared use path or a physically separated bike lane would be ideal for our most vulnerable users. As we move into the yellow band, these are our users that have some level of comfort on the road, but may still want some protection. So the facilities below them reflect the buffered bike lane, the on-street buffered bike lane, and the on-street standard bike lane. And then as we move down the spectrum into orange and red, we have our most experienced users and who are most comfortable on the road. So the facilities there could be a shoulder bikeway or a shared roadway.
I like that graphic, by the way. I think that's cool.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. It expresses a lot of good information pretty concisely. And then we have sort of the existing conditions context for identifying the preferred bike facility. So as we talked about with level of traffic stress, the two key elements of that are volume and speed, which you see on the axes here. And then there are additional factors that we want to look at on any roadway or any corridor, things like peak hour activity, rush hour restrictions, things like that. The types of vehicles that are on the corridor, oftentimes putting a bike lane on a freight route, not the best idea, depending on the type of facility. We want to look at parking and curbside activities so that we can look at the potential for conflicts or how we might use design to reduce conflicts. And then the intersection of things that break up a bike facility or create interruptions like driveways or intersections. And we also want to look at our vulnerable populations. And we talked a little bit about that earlier, and especially folks that may be using bikes out of necessity for transportation purposes and day-to-day activities and shopping because they need to. So on this graph, which comes from the FHWA bike selection guideline, you can see lower speeds and lower volumes express the facility that would be more of a shared lane or a bike boulevard at the neighborhood level. And then midway up, you've got bike lanes, preferred buffer bike lane, kind of like the middle of the road between volume and speed and some of these other elements. And then where you have very high speeds and very high vehicle volumes, you want a separated bike lane or a shared use path, ideally. And again, these are all kind of ideal conditions, but each facility will really be customized. And then as we look at best practices, you know, there's a couple of common threads when we evaluate feasibility for all facilities, regardless of which type we select. And that's the space to build the facility, funding, maintenance, and then whether we implement it as a standalone project or we think about integrating the design into a larger corridor or roadway project. So those are kind of all factors that need to be looked at from the get-go. And then there's key themes among all the different facilities, right? So, you know, one-way versus two-way facilities, how much width those might potentially take up in the right-of-way, design features and materials, network connectivity, safety is obviously a critical one, access to destinations, looking at operation of intersections and how they intersect with the facilities. And then, like we just discussed, existing corridor activities. So I'll go through each of the facilities just quickly. And again, we've got Melvin Avenue on the right there with kind of a close-up. And it sounds like the traffic calming has now been hardened on this corridor. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the pilot's over and they put the permanent solution in.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So for on-road bike lanes, you know, this is the sort of type of technical guidance that we're providing. You know, we're looking at standard widths for a bike lane based on the conditions of where it's located, which is on the left side of the chart. And then generally with all bike facilities and also with pedestrian facilities, there's a minimum width that we want. And then there's also a sort of a constrained width, which says, hey, if you don't have the real estate to put a minimum 5 foot wide bicycle lane in these conditions, the minimum can be 4. And that may be something that you all look at in terms of Annapolis is really, you know, where there are some of those constraints, figuring out what the best design solution is and what kind of purchase you can get within the right of way to put in facilities. It may not always be a perfect 5 feet. It may not always be a perfect 4 feet, but making sure that you're trying to get to those as closely as you can. And then we've got separated bike facilities. So the photo on your right shows a grade separated bike facility, which is actually in Minneapolis, but it shows for corridors where you do have the right of way, how you can really separate and dedicate public right of way to cyclists that are significantly protected and separated from traffic, provides another level of safety. Typically, this type of facility really encourages those people that are on the user end of the spectrum that either don't bicycle or aren't super comfortable, or if there was a safer facility, they might consider bicycling. It tends to attract those people, and then it also provides a safe facility for those that are comfortable cyclists, regardless of range. So again, our technical memo looks at peak bicyclist volumes. It looks at where the facility is located and how many, if we have a one-way or a two-way bicycle lane, and then recommend some of the widths that the city can consider if they were prone to implement this type of facility.
Yeah, I just want to add that, I think even though these may be more expensive facilities, this is really the direction I think the city is going to go in the future. I think as we try to pull in more of that demographic that just is very focused on safety and being separated from cars. I mean, this is going to make it a lot more enticing. And in a lot of our most constrained corridors, like the Bay Ridge Avenue example that Toole has looked at, we have situations where we can't really take any more width, or we don't have enough to take away from existing car lanes, but you might be adjacent to a shopping center that has a really significant setback, parking area and existing sidewalk and vegetation buffer. And there may be an opportunity to utilize sidewalk area more strategically. So, that's Hilltop Lane's another example that we talk about a lot. It's striped lanes today, kind of your standard, but still a lot of people don't feel safe riding on it. And so that might be more of a, not grade separated, but, have a barrier so people feel safe, separated from the cars. But that's definitely the direction we're in. And from a public works perspective, it's less maintenance ultimately, which they really appreciate. So, that's the kind of where we're headed.
Yeah, and I'll add there's some mutual benefits to that, right? When we start to stripe and make space for cyclists, we're also making space and visual room and physical room for pedestrians as well. As you can see in this intersection, as a driver, you're really going to be paying attention to what's going on, and you're not going to cut that corner very quickly because you're anticipating users at that corner, both cyclists and pedestrians. So there can sometimes be mutual benefits to making that especially an added value. And then next up, we've got our bicycle boulevards. So as I mentioned, those are really neighborhood focused, and these are really context sensitive solutions that really can be modified to what the needs of the corridor are, what the needs of the users and the neighbors are. And as you can see, there's kind of this chart of motorized speeds and volume and, peak hourly vehicle traffic. Preferred is 150 cars or less per hour, 1,000 or less per day at an operating speed of 15 miles an hour. And, the max is 400 cars at the peak hour and operating speed of 25 miles per hour. So these are really focused on neighborhood. These are really neighborhood focused bike facilities. But there's also a range of treatments that can comprise a bicycle boulevard that range from low impact, which could just be wayfinding signage, like you see in the photo on the right, giving people good, clear, concise directional wayfinding toward their destinations. It can include pavement markings, and then it can also include physical improvements like intersection treatments, traffic calming, and then sort of higher impact traffic diversions. And it doesn't have to be one or all of these things. It's really a menu of treatments depending on, what the outcome is that you're looking to do. So with bicycle boulevards, really a customizable tool for neighborhoods. And again, mutual benefits also for folks that are with pedestrians, folks that are walking dogs, walking with strollers. The bicycle boulevards tend to just kind of slow it down to a very community-oriented street in a positive way. And then as we discussed before, we've got our buffered bike lane. So our design guide really provides some, typical widths and proposed widths for, buffers that you might find or locate adjacent to the street versus adjacent to parking versus adjacent to sidewalks. And give some context there, especially with a parking buffer. You typically don't want that to be 6 inches wide because you've got folks swinging their door open. So you want to make sure you have enough purchase there that everybody can cycle and drivers can exit their cars comfortably. So the buffered bike lanes, again, there's a variety of treatments and a variety of sort of horizontal treatments that can be used to provide that buffer that's desired.
Yeah, that's the big problem with the bike lane on Melvin. And just disclaimer, I live in West Annapolis, so I'm familiar with it. But that's the big problem with that bike lane, is that it's 4 feet, and so it's virtually all in the door zone. And I wouldn't ever recommend riding in it, because if somebody opens the door, you're gonna hit it. So I mean, it's not, and it was the bike lane, frankly, was really put there as a traffic calming methodology more than actually as used as a bike lane. So that's, the diagrams here are well taken. It's unfortunate you don't have the room on someplace like Melvin Avenue to have a buffer that keeps you out of the door zone.
Yeah. And in some cities, they're also flipping the buffer and the parking, right? So the parking actually becomes a much heavier physical buffer. And then you have the parking lane to the left, the buffer, and then the bicycle lane that's adjacent to the curb, which honestly,
much to Kurt Riegel, who's the chair of the Transportation Board's chagrin, who also lives in West Annapolis. He really advocated for a 2-way cycle track that was buffered by parked cars. But our public works folks were having no part of that. In time. Yeah, it's maybe a lot of time. We'll see.
But this is an example that, and Kelly mentioned, with the with the bike lane example earlier, and just kind of having this range of treatments based on how much space we do have, and that was a big need for doing this this document. It's just kind of understanding what's that spectrum, given that we rarely have the ideal amount of space. And
understood.
Yeah. Yes. Anyhow, just that's the usual.
I'm nothing if not a pragmatist.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to derail you.
Okay. And the last section of our design guidance provides just some basic information on wayfinding. So this is obviously the way in which people orient themselves as they go from place to place and navigate physical spaces. So with regard to signage and wayfinding, principles are pretty simple. Keep it simple, be consistent, designed for the casual user, someone who may be visiting should be able to navigate using the wayfinding signage. Progressively disclose information as you go along the route. And then this one in particular for cyclists is maintain momentum. So especially in places where it might be have a little more elevation, we want to make sure you're not stopping the cyclist so that they have to look at the sign and then jump back on their bike and restart all over again. So maintaining momentum for cyclists. And the four stages of wayfinding navigation comprise orientation, which is determining your location relative to the objects nearby, and then your ultimate destination. Decision making is the second stage, which is like the selection of your route to the desired destination. Confirmation are all the visual cues and signs that let you know you are headed in the right direction. And then finally, your destination recognition of being able to actually see that and know that you're there. And the image on the right just kind of shows you a couple of those different decision signs. And there's a variety of different design options that can be found in the Maryland MUTCD. So there's like kind of a kit of parts in a variety of ways that a city can design a wayfinding system and confirmation signs and all the elements of the 4 stages of navigation that give you that information. And then lastly, there's a hierarchy of information with wayfinding. So level 1, which you'll see represented just on the right in these large red dots, are regional destinations. So your biggest destinations in town that you're trying to guide people to. Level 2 hierarchy are your districts, your neighborhoods, your major landmarks. Those are expressed by the purple dots on the map. And then level 3 are your local or your neighborhood destinations or your local landmarks that are represented by the purple dots. So conceptually, as wayfinding is being designed, these are the kind of maps that we work with communities on to identify what those locations are and what level they're at. And that starts to inform the types of signage, wayfinding signage, whether that's for the city, for tourism, for bicycle wayfinding. It can be for a variety of different purposes. So we're providing some additional information there that's found in the Maryland MUTCD that provides both paving and signage wayfinding related to bike facility infrastructure. So that's kind of the overview of the draft document and where we are now. And I'd be happy to open it up for discussion or if there are questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you.
So I have a couple of things that in I apologize if they get sort of too far down the weeds because I haven't read the draft, which I would certainly would love to read through at some point. But just a couple things I wanted to get your sense on. And so one's not necessarily related to bikes, although it can be relevant and is leading pedestrian signals. I know a lot of our stoplights in the city are old and may not be able to be programmed that way. But even in the newer ones, it's something you see very often in larger cities who have, sort of gone, kept up with those practices. And just for anybody who doesn't know what that is, basically it lets a pedestrian start to walk before any traffic in the same way goes. That way a pedestrian can get into the crosswalk and visible to somebody maybe turning right, because if they both go at the same time, the car takes off and then there's a conflict point. And that could be applicable to a bike on a sidewalk or if it's a trail or something like that. So definitely, I hope you think about that. The second one is something that I've brought up with the county many times and on county trail projects. There may be more of these eventually, especially down towards Forest Drive. But whenever we have shared use paths that cross curb cuts or even small streets, I'm not talking about a big intersection that, has traffic flow is important. I'm talking about, curb cuts into either businesses or small, apartment complexes or even small, one-way, or non-through streets. But typically the shared use path is interrupted, so it looks like the road is planted on top of the path. So what that telegraphs to everybody is vehicles have priority, and typically there'll be a stop sign for the path. And if you look at the kinds of treatment that's done in places in Europe, is the path will all stay at grade. So what usually happens too is there'll be some small change in grade down to the road level. Even if it's gentle, there is a grade change that tells you, okay, you are now entering the street and vehicles have priority. And in many places in Europe, you'll see that the shared use path stays at the same level. And it acts somewhat as a speed table. I think that's the current traffic engineering term for something that's not a speed bump, but it's a raised section that's long. And it sort of acts as a speed table, so vehicles crossing it, can't do it quickly. And typically the radii is really small, so you can't make fast turns. And I've argued with the public works folks in the county about this many, many times, and they basically categorically say no unless the public safety people say it's okay. So if the police and fire say it's not going to impede my safety, And typically they're like, no, because they don't like anything that impedes at all. So I encourage you to, especially in those cases where they're just curb cuts into businesses, to really look out for that kind of treatment, because I think that's really important to telegraph to the people on shared use path that, you know, you don't have, you're an important user. You probably heard that, you know, many times, but I just really want to make sure that that kind of thing gets put into play. And then the last one is sort of related, but we see this a lot in maybe less urban areas on trails where, like on the B&A trail, where it crosses really low flow streets, you know, even places that go into a neighborhood that have, you know, 400 ADT, really small, but they'll put the stop sign on the trail crossing, and basically nobody going down the trail stops, and all the vehicle operators know that, and so basically they're all pretty generous and stop, wave people across. And I mean, I brought this up with the county a million times, like, why don't you just sync the signs up with the behavior on the ground, instead of creating this ambiguity where you've got, you know, 99% of the cars stop and wave and most of the trail users keep going. So just sync up the signage with the actual behavior on the ground, rather than keeping this ambiguous sort of state. They don't seem to want to do that. I don't know why, but that's something, again, I would really encourage for, you know, especially curb cuts and that kind of stuff. Even if it means, you know, on a you know, where a car's turning into a business, that they might have to wait, that they don't have the priority versus the trail user or shared use path user. So those are really my two big complaints in the way shared use paths are implemented in many places in this country. And I really hope that we can make some progress on that. So anyway, those are my general comments that I hope somehow could get reflected in the draft. So anybody else want to chime in? Sorry, I'm kind of dominating the conversation here, mostly because it's an area that I know well and obviously have some strong opinions about. But
I found the information quite helpful, and your taking lead was actually much appreciated to guide the conversation. So I learned things that I didn't think to ask.
Anyway, I'm really happy that we're making some movement on this. David, you have a comment? Or
I really don't have anything to add at this time. I'm going to have to review it again, but I appreciate everything you've done. Thanks.
Tom, any questions, comments?
No, same. It's really been informative, and you're quite passionate about it. So I'm just like Teresa, following your lead.
Cool. Well, hopefully, Eric, we can get a chance to look at the whole draft. I'd certainly.
Yeah. We can send out. Toole is making some edits that we shared with them, and I think once they've done that, we can send out the draft. No problem with that. And we're going to give another presentation in September to the City Council Transportation Committee, because we would hope, our plan is to have this adopted so it's an appendix to the 2011 bike plan. And I think I should have said at the beginning that from my perspective, one of the immediate values of this document is going to be when there's road repavings, and we do have recommendations already in place for certain bike facilities. Sometimes what comes up is, you know, there's more discussion about the recommendation, and you know, measurements are taken, and there may be a part of the roadway where it tapers down to a narrower section, and there's debate about what we should do. And this document is going to really help us, I think, as Kelly mentioned, streamline the decision-making so that we can just get these things done more quickly, I think. Because that's typically when we do a lot of the improvements on the streets is when they're paved.
Yep.
Doesn't always happen that way, but that's really the idea. So, and there's constant roadway paving happening around the city. So that's this is going to come in really handy for that. But there's a lot of other major trails that, where we're already doing some of this.
So have you had an opportunity to show this to the transportation board? I think they certainly would be interested in looking at it, and whether, at the risk of signing you up for another presentation, we might, if nothing else, just recommend that they watch this video, because chances are that may be the same presentation you give, and then if they have additional questions, maybe they could field those asynchronously.
Yeah.
I'm happy to let Kurt know, save you the effort. And if you're willing to sort of let them watch this participation and then take some questions, via email or whatever, I'm sure they would be happy to do that.
I might be able to give the presentation instead of, Toole hasn't been scoped for that meeting, but I could probably give that presentation, having kind of been through the process, and we should have something a little bit more final by then. So at least,
okay.
But that's a good suggestion.
Well, I'll certainly recommend that they watch this at any rate, just to get a good flavor of it.
Yeah. Actually,
one of the reasons I'm so insistent on that we record our meetings on YouTube. So anyway,
Kurt, actually, he's the chair of the transportation board, and Kelly, he comes to the city council transportation committee, so at least he would probably be there for that, and that would help too.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, the more cross-pollination, the more information we share, usually the better.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Great. Well, thank you, Kelly. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it, and thanks for the opportunity to give a little bit of feedback.
Sure. Thanks for having us on your agenda tonight. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay. Any closing thoughts, Eric?
No.
Yes. No, you good?
I'm good. Just I will plan to share the document with you all once we've have it edited, and it didn't take any other comments certainly that might come up. So.
Okay. Thanks a bunch again.
Thank
Okay,
you, everybody, and
that
thank you
brings
for
us-
your service.
Yep. Thanks, Brian. So takes us to last item, communications, which I don't have any communications. If anybody else on the commission has anything they want to share, this would be a good time to do that. Hearing none, that takes us to the last item, which is adjournment. So certainly entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, we have a second.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, great. Well, it's short summer 1 hour meeting. That's good. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.